All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Big thank you to all of the organizers of Bsides and to all of you for attending and spreading the word. We're talking about Burp Suite today. It's not an introductory talk. You should know a few things already, but it's also not super crazy. So this is my name, Marius Nepomuceno. This is why, one of the reasons I go by Marius. Some of the stuff I've done, I'm a co-founder of Clevesec. We're just a local information security group that we have monthly meetings with speakers and stuff like that. If you're curious, check them out on @Clevesec on Twitter. That's my website, mznlab.net, where I post my projects and things like that. All of the stuff you'll see here will be there. I'll give you links and all of that. Some stuff about which I'll talk all day, not using final prepositions and other language topics. I'm a language guy. I love literature and things like that. So I'll talk about it all day. Brazil, I'm from Brazil, and how it sounds like a Z, but it's spelled with an S. So orthography and phonetics. InfoSec, Python, general hackery stuff. Love all of that. That's me on Twitter, @AliSpike. And here's some things you need to know for this. Some basic Python. Not too much, just kind of what it is, how to define some functions and things like that. Some Java UI stuff, kind of optional, but if you want to include UI elements into your Burp Suite extensions, you will need to get some Java syntax in there. You can learn on the fly as you're doing your extensions, or you can go and reference the docs. And this little number that you can see, hopefully, appended to some items throughout the presentation, points to a corresponding resource at that link. It's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/mznlab-wb for wielding burp. So I have a numeric list at that link. Number 1 here is the link to the Java docs. We'll have more resources coming up. I'm assuming you have Burp Suite Pro because extensions have the most power with Burp Suite Pro. But since version 1.6, they did open the free version to Extender and the API. So you can do a lot of stuff with the free version anyway. Just assume that we're using Pro features in this presentation. Let's see. All right, let's get started. So like I said, this is aimed at people who have already used Burp, but haven't delved in that deeply with extensions and things like that. What you'll learn, how to start writing your own extension, actual verbatim code and things like that, so expect some code. We will use Jython, so everything will look like Python. You can still use Java elements in there. And then you'll learn what you can do with extensions. And past that, we'll actually take a look at some built-in Burp Suite automation features that can be done without having to worry about any extensions at all, and then how to use them. Overall, it's not a particularly funny or witty talk or anything. Lots of explaining and guiding, lots of resources and things like that. On the other hand, it's not a depressing InfoSec talk, like the world's falling down or anything. So, excellent. The Burp Suite extension API. It's indeed limitless. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. Here's where to find it. You go to Burp Suite, Extender tab, APIs sub-tab, and then you can actually use these two buttons to either save the interface files themselves. You can do that to set up your IDE environment, for example, or you can save the JavaDoc files. It's just a bunch of HTML files that you save locally, and you browse. It looks exactly like the Java documentation, but it's for all of the Burp Suite API. Starting from scratch, literally, that will be your first line. You go from burp, import iBurp extender. That's how you start your extension. All of the other interfaces which your classes themselves will implement, you'll also need to import. Here's some examples. The message editor tab factory and message editor tab, intruder payload generation, scanner, insertion points, generators, contacts menu factory, which allows you to include additional menu items into Burp Suite's own right-click menu. IHTTP listener, we'll talk about it a little bit after as well. But other than these, generally, and some others like these, other interfaces from the API can be implemented through callbacks. And I'll explain callbacks coming up as well. But whenever you declare an actual class, and so you go class, parenthesis, and then you implement other Burp Suite interfaces, those are the ones you need to import. So you go from burp, import iHTTP listener at the very top. And then, when you're done importing all of the Burp API stuff, import everything else you need, both from Python, so you do your OS imports, exception info from array, whatever you need. All of the Python packages are available to you, and Java packages are available to you as well, because again, we're using Jython. It includes the functionality from both frameworks. Your first class will look exactly like that. You go class burp extender. It needs to be called burp extender. That's what the API calls for. And then you declare that you're implementing iBurp extender in that class. And then the brackets there is for anything else you want to implement on the class itself. And then you go define register extender callbacks. It's the first method that you will call just to register those callbacks, which again we'll talk about it soon. And set a couple of local variables to get your callbacks and helpers. We'll talk about helpers coming up shortly as well. You can stop implementing at iBurp extender if that's all you're going to implement in this class. Or if you're going to implement other interfaces in that class itself, you go ahead and put them in there as well. So I have examples coming up for all this. New classes are needed if we're going to implement more than one instance of an interface. So for example, if your extension is going to include 2 custom tabs that you're going to create in the Burp UI, you cannot implement the message editor tab factory inside the Burp extender class, because that will only give you access to one tab. You have to actually create a new class that implements the message editor tab, and then you can create as many new classes as you want that also implement the message editor tab. I also have examples coming up, so I know you're all like, what are the examples? But they're coming. Callbacks and helpers, finally. Callbacks are, they're both a lot of functionality, really, that are available to you for use it with your extension. So callbacks refer to iBurp extender callbacks documentation for all of the lists of methods that it has, but it includes things like adding, removing, registering, setting and creating stuff, usually to enable functionality between interfaces and for intercommunication between interfaces. And when I say interfaces, I mean the Burp Suite API interfaces. Helpers are at the higher level, kind of. So you use helpers to analyze, decode, encode, build, and convert actual HTTP message content. So you can actually get it, manipulate it, return it to whatever you need to do. Building on, so you're supposed to not see that because it's all the stuff we've already done. You're just registering your extension and then setting the callbacks and helpers. After that, you can set your extension name through a callbacks method, and then you can register any interfaces that you want. So callbacks has the method to register your extension as X interface provider. So if you're providing custom tabs, you register your extension as a tab factory provider or whatever. Here's an example. I'm implementing my own Burp extender class as a message editor tab factory, and then when I call my register method, it's going to be called register message editor tab factory, and I'm just passing self because it's in its own class. So it's in the actual own Burp extender class. After that, I can create a new tab instance that will actually create the tab element in the UI. I pass it self-controller and editable. You can see why in the documentation for all of that. And I return my tab class, which I haven't created yet, but we will. So in this case, you would have to import not only iBurp extender, but also iMessage editor tab factory. here's the other scenario for this. I don't want just one tab in my UI. I want more than one tab. In that case, I cannot implement the message editor tab factory inside Burp Extender. I have to register a new one and create another class. So I make a class, that's my factory class, and I pass in, or that implements iMessage editor tab factory. In this way, I can create as many new tab factory classes as I want, to have as many tabs in the UI as I want. And then the create new instance method will, of course, instead of go on the Burp Extender class, go underneath your factory class, because that's what you're defining and creating instances for. It still returns a class, a tab class. So Burp Suite has the iMessage editor tab factory and also a iMessage editor tab. It's
Hello, Angik here. Unfortunately, a large portion of this talk's audio went missing because one of the capture devices failed. Sorry about the inconvenience.
for a valid request. So macro 2 submits a series of requests to log in, because it's not just one request that logs me in. And the rule that I use is check that session is valid. So I run macro 1, I match the invalid value, and if it's an actual valid value, I stop processing right there because I still have a session. Otherwise, run the second macro to log me back in, get me a different cookie, store the cookie in the cookie jar, and get my tools all set up and ready to go. I use this when I need to do a really thorough scan of an application that takes days. So I make sure not to lose my session while all of that is happening. I did set it to be invoked every 5 requests. That 5 is completely arbitrary. You can set it to be invoked every X number of requests, so it doesn't bog down your application. And it's limited to, you can always limit rules to scoping. So I've limited to the current host that I wanted, and spider, scanner, intruder, and repeater, because those are the tools I was using. That's all I got. I know it's a lot of stuff, but I've got it all compiled here. The presentation itself is in there. All of the resources are in there. You can refer to those little numbers throughout the presentation to match which resource belongs where. Thank you very much for listening. Go out and play.